Well, Jay, Rob Abelow is one of the folks in the business that we hold in the highest regard. Very bright guy. He's got a great blog, Where Music's Going. And unfortunately, I wasn't there that day, but you had a great chance to sit down with Rob and kibitz, shall we say.
Yeah, we got to talk about his recent article, Music's Biggest Problems, and that was in your morning coffee. Hopefully everybody read that. Rob had a chance to ask 35,000 plus people, what's the biggest problem to solve in music? And he says in the piece that problems are opportunities, and the music industry has plenty, and he wasn't kidding. So Rob and I sort of break down the top 10. So without further ado, here's Rob Abelow, a special bonus episode of the Your Morning Coffee podcast. Let it roll.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air. On the air. On the air. On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Talk a little bit about you and where music's going. You've been doing that for a couple of years. Open Stage, Roll Call Records. You've got your finger in a lot of pies.
Yeah. So Roll Call, I had spent, 10 years prior to this running a record label and 15 plus years managing bands. I'm less active in that now. I don't manage any bands. The label is more passive, but that was kind of my in the trenches, understanding how difficult all of this is. Where music's going, I started writing almost 2 years ago, and that was really trying to understand, what are the problems that are out there? What is the new tech, the new trends, the new strategies that people could use to, grow better artist careers, more sustainable fan bases. It's really been interesting because it's attracted a community of what I call artists and builders. And builders for me is a lot of people who are building new tech, new companies, new platforms, but also a lot of people in the industry who are just thinking differently and want to change things. So a lot of these answers come from that group. I work with Open Stage, which is a fan relationship management platform of sorts, right? So it effectively is working to help artists know all of their fans, consolidate their fan data, make sense of it, communicate with them directly, and then offer better, more personalized experiences for them.
Yeah. You're Where Music's Going. I'm a big fan. I've used some of those slides that you've created in presentations that I do. I love your consumption to fandom on vinyl. I think those discussions are just on point. Let's talk about music's biggest problems. The first one is music has been devalued. Let's talk about that for a minute.
This is such an interesting one because I think it actually can mean different things to different people, right? For some people, it's literally just the price that people are paying, or that an artist gets paid at 4/10 of a penny or something. But I think for a lot of people, and maybe for me, it's much more of a perceptive thing. And it's that music feels more disposable. Another question I pose to people is, was music valued more today or during the Napster era when people paid nothing for it? And people, I think, pretty strongly feel it was valued more then because you had to invest your time and your energy and you really care. And when you had that, even when you downloaded it, you were gonna, spend more time with less stuff and get to know it, and it meant more to you. Whereas now, things are so disposable. It's easy to skip it. And I think that's really the core of this point.
Yeah, it's a different experience. I always tell people that, a stream isn't worth a download isn't worth a CD isn't worth premium vinyl, etc. These different configurations, different behaviors attached to them. And I like what you just said about the download, because you're absolutely right. Back in that day, you had to work pretty hard. We didn't have the bandwidth that we have today, and there was a lot of spoofing going on. And it was almost like ownership, because you would get that thing and you would create, whether it was you would burn a CD or you'd make your playlist. It was more of a lean in experience, I think.
I had to know where I was going, right? I went and I downloaded that thing because I had very high intent, right? I heard about this from someone or a review or whatever, and I said, hey, I want to get, really lead into this song or this artist. Now it's mostly served up for me in many cases. It just feels like it's endless.
Yeah. The second point was on streaming and Spotify under music's biggest problems. As Ricky Warwick sang, there's three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. And I think with Spotify, there's some misconceptions, and I'm not saying it's pro or con, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because people say, well, Spotify doesn't pay artists enough. Well, they typically don't pay artists. They pay the rights holders. And if you're signed to a label, what does that deal look like? And I was reading that they're paying out nearly 70% of what they take in, which is sort of what iTunes did back in the day. It's a different configuration, but I know that people are upset that they don't make enough money from streaming, especially on the songwriter front. And then now with all of this stuff about bundles, and so they can pay a lower royalty. Talk a little bit about why people are so upset with streaming and Spotify.
Well, I think the reality of it is it's just the 800-pound gorilla in the room, that because it's become the primary business model and Spotify is really shorthand for streaming, it's just going to naturally be the cause of any, frustrations or problems. So you're just going to point at that thing. This is the biggest thing, right? Fair or not. And probably many times it's true, even if it's caused many positive things. Something that streaming and Spotify has done, or as well as some other democratizing effects, is that it's created really many, many, many more artists who have the ability to make at least some amount of money. That's also meaning lots of artists who think they should be making more money, or have maybe seen the potential of making more money. They have the ability to be vocal about it. So it's just created a situation where they're going to be attacked and spoken about. And that's part of what I try to talk about in this article. It's just, streaming and Spotify came along and solved, massive problems within the music industry when we were kind of, recorded music was at the bottom. And with any solution, there's going to be, so many more consequences and problems that stem from it that need to be solved, and that really are new opportunities. So, if people were hard pressed, if I asked the reverse question to say, what are the best things that happened over the last 15 years in music? It'd be hard to not say streaming as number one.
Yeah. You make your music available globally, in a heartbeat, really. It's lowered that barrier to entry. Let's talk a little bit about artists not knowing who their fans are. This is number 3, because this is near and dear to my heart. In some ways, and I'd love to get your take on this, in some ways I feel like we do know a lot more about who our fans are. I remember back when the illegal version of Napster launched, and I had a meeting there. And for example, you could see that, what people had in their music libraries. And maybe you saw that people had, Metallica, but they also had Lyle Lovett. I know I have all the albums from both of those artists. So maybe we should put them on the road together. I know that sounds absurd, but for the first time, we sort of knew a little bit about that fan behavior other than like blowing cards or something. And I feel like now it's almost information overload that you need somebody on your team that's looking at Spotify for artists, Apple Music for artists, Google Analytics, YouTube Analytics, like all of that stuff to sort of wrap their heads around who that audience is. So this sounds a little bit like streaming to me, where yeah, it's a big problem, but it's also a big solution. What do you think?
Yes and no. I mean, I think, the tools like Spotify for artists, et cetera, are helpful in many ways, but they're still approximations. And when I think of knowing who your fans are, I want to know, anonymized metrics of where they're located, but there's also I want to have a direct relationship. And I think because of a lot of the way direction music's going and the fact that there's such an oversupply and it's so democratized, which means it's harder and harder to reach people, even if we're able to reach them through streaming or social yesterday, your next piece of content also needs to perform to reach even your own followers again. It's so paramount to have that direct relationship. And if you think about other kind of brands or e-commerce, the most important thing is I have that direct relationship. Whereas in music, the artist always has a go-between, and that is becoming more and more challenging. And I think artists are realizing that, teams are realizing that and saying, okay, how do I have this direct relationship and how can I make, use of that and derive value from that? Because all the things that we would always do to market and reach my audience are less and less reliable than ever before.
Yeah, I think you just hit it when you talk about that direct relationship with your fans. And I think some developing and middle class artists now are getting so creative at capturing their email address or selling, D2C or whatever it is. And, there's a lot of talk about super fans today. Artists don't really have that direct contact with a lot of their fans. I mean, how great would it be if artists that we're working with, we could reach out to their super fans in these different, DMAs and just sort of engage with them and reward them. And that, I think you point out something that's really important, and it's a problem that really needs to be solved, which is, fostering that relationship with your own fans. Number 4, oversaturation of music, too much noise. Man, this is so important today because, again, the barrier to entry is so low now. If you look at if you look at Luminate's last report, and there'll be new reports coming in the coming weeks, but there were 184 million ISRC codes, so basically tracks. So 184 million tracks out there that they were tracking. 86% of those streamed 1,000 or less. 25% of them streamed 0. There's a really great site we joke around about. It's called Forgotify, and you can go in there and listen to something that's never been played once. And it's talk about what a problem this oversaturation is.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is this is part of what people are talking about when they say streaming or they don't know their fans. It really comes from this, and it's democratization of creation, of distribution, of marketing has some serious downsides, right? And it I think in many ways can make it difficult, especially for like the middle class, tier of artists, because now there's many aspiring, artists who are kind of taking, fractions and slices of their pie, not just of money, but of attention, right? And it means it's very difficult for any individual artist to coalesce an audience and reliably build a business or get invested into. And I think there's kind of this paradox there where then the artists at the very, very, very top, the few that are able to capture, massive audiences actually win from that. I think it's why we've seen just Taylor Swift is one of the few, last pop stars who are actually able to reach everyone. I think this contributes to that. There's kind of this paradox that's like in recorded music, the problem is, one of the big problems is oversupply and not enough demand. Whereas in live and ticketing, where we have things that are more scarce, the biggest problems occur when we have too much demand and not enough supply. And that is why that business monetizes, in a much better way.
Yeah, and I think the problem's going to get worse with things like, generative AI, where sort of the user becomes the creator in some ways. It's easier for people that don't play an instrument or don't sing well to use technology to release more and more music. And I wonder what this next year is going to look like as far as that average number of songs uploaded to DSPs. Could it grow 25%, 50%? Could it double? It's going to be a crazy year with more and more noise coming.
I agree. And something that's interesting about this one is, yeah, it's a problem, but you're not going to really solve this problem directly, right? Like there's going to continue to be an oversaturation. But that's like the root cause, so how do you have solutions built on top of that help artists break through to people and create things reliably? How do you help fans sort through that oversaturation?
Yeah. And I think that leads beautifully into problem number 5, lack of real artist development and investment. I think that's as old as the music industry. A lot of people don't realize that even these successful labels that you think of as very successful labels, they may sign 12 to 15 artists for that one that breaks through and pays for the development of some of those others that didn't break through. Talk about artist development and investment today.
Yeah, I think the perception and some of the reality is just from the label side. It's maybe pairs of number 6. The industry prioritizes numbers over artistry, right? Which is, chasing the viral thing, looking at the vanity metrics, and just trying to kind of, use algorithms to see what's popping and jump after that, instead of saying, who's an artist that's really connecting or we believe in, and dump a lot into that. The issue there is, a lot of the incentives, especially for the bigger labels, clearly show that it's smarter for them to go in that direction. I think we're seeing, and we'll continue to see, management companies really expand on how they're investing and the scope of services, because they are truly invested in the 360 of the artist business and can wear that artist development cap, in a more aligned way. So I think that can be a solution, that comes online here.
One of my favorite quotes is from Jonathan Daniel. He said, "If you give me a great song, my job is easy. You give me a good song, my job's impossible."
Mm-hmm.
I think that today you need that artist development and that investment. And it takes time to grow that audience. And you talked about number 6, the industry prioritizes numbers over artistry. Yeah, because, they're lazy. And people want to just look at your social footprint or your streaming to decide whether you're going to be in a festival or not, or what place you're going to be, or whether you should open for this other artist. And I think there's so much more behind the numbers. And I'd love to get your take on this, because I did a panel on data and A&R at Music Tectonics once, and I got a really great response from one of the A&R people. We were talking about all these data platforms and how they can, with a push of a button, see what artists were dropped and who's got so many monthly listeners and all of that. And I asked her, how do you use the data to sign artists? And she goes, well, the first thing I do is I look for a lineup around the block to see them play on a Tuesday night. And then I go meet them and see if they're mature enough to handle what could be coming their way. Talk about how, the industry does prioritize numbers over artistry sometimes.
Well, I would love it if it was those numbers that you just mentioned, because I think typically it's the numbers of, what is the viral thing that just happened recently. I think there's a lot that are moving away from that, for sure. But I think, what people are speaking to is, there's less an idea of, this artist is special, they have something important to say. If we put in the time of developing them, we can create this really important artist and career. And instead saying, these are these numbers, if we sign this and put money behind it, we can kind of grow it to this, and it's been de-risked. It's a hard problem to solve. I think if we could look at the right numbers, so this is, what are the vanity metrics versus metrics of fandom? The problem here is, people are going to use metrics that are easily comparable and easily accessible. And everyone can easily go see Spotify monthly listeners. They can see the streams. They can go into, you don't even need any data platform for that, right? You can go into their TikTok or whatever and see those numbers. We don't have consistent, strong numbers that are showing us really how invested are fans, how engaged are they. But I do think artists like Fred Again and Chappell Roan, who actually kind of have built in a very different way from incredibly engaged core fans, really signal like where you need to be looking and what is going to break through. It's like, okay, do they have these 500,000 core fans who are obsessed with them, and is that what we're going to build from? Because that's something that's going to build and sustain outside of just a viral moment.
I wonder if today, if you want to be signed by a label, there's so much you can do independently, but if you want to get signed by a major or a major indie, I feel like you need to already bring them the numbers and trends and, what you're doing, what cap rooms you're playing and what kind of merch you're selling and all of those things. That it's a little less risky for some of those labels because they've sort of got these numbers.
And as an artist, you have much better leverage, right? And you've now got control going into that situation. I'm going to go back to Chappell Roan, right? I mean, she was signed to a major and she was trying to go that typical top-down path and chasing, to be replicative of this pop star of the moment, and when she left that and kind of pursued what didn't seem like a mass appeal route, she kind of went after this very specific character and these very specific niche of fans, and she just built that thing that was kind of more true and special to her. Then it started getting this traction, and then she's, signs through an imprint to a major, and they're able to pour gasoline on that fire. But she really had total control over the direction and kind of almost got to that like product market fit, right? Before like the growth VC money was dumped on. I think that's a better model for what makes sense.
Yeah. And you just said pour gasoline on the fire. And I heard that from someone at a major label recently where they said, our job is less about artist development. It's more about audience development. But really what he said was that they're throwing gasoline on the artist's fire. They're not signing someone with zero fan base or, those days are long gone. It's interesting.
And I think that's just a new alignment of what the music industry has been shifting to for quite a long time. I think if you go back to the lack of artist development, it does say, okay, well then are artists completely on their own in that early portion of time? Are the indie labels going to stand in there? Are there artist managers? Or do we need maybe some additional roles, especially with so many of these freelancers and consultants out there, to kind of help them get to, 0 to 1?
8 and 9 are both about AI. And I know that's a hot topic today. We're going to be doing an AI roundtable here pretty soon. The thing about AI, first of all, with these companies that are training on someone else's intellectual property, yeah, that's a huge problem. Talk a little bit about what people are concerned about with AI now becoming so big and so important.
Yeah, I mean, I think, AI coming in, making things more oversaturated, stealing market share, just kind of flooding the attention market, but really being based on artists' work without them being compensated in any way. I think there's a big, obviously AI is one of the biggest opportunities in music. I'm hoping it's an opportunity that artists can actually share in, especially artists whose music has been trained on. And so I think that that's a big part of where this highlighted concern is, right? It's that, music is being trained on without permission or consent. And then also, what are the payment rails to bring, some derivative money back to artists who it was trained on, right? So it's like, how do we make this fair? And then how do we make sure artists share in those wins?
Yeah, and I would even say that if it's training on your intellectual property, I mean, you should be able to opt out, or you should have some input into that. Just like if someone were to use part of your song as a sample, in a song like they did back in the day.
Without a doubt, right? I mean, it's about you having control over it. Like something I didn't see mentioned much that I thought was surprising and also was just a very real thing with AI is, the most practical parts of music that are going to be at least first probably opportunities removed for artists are the kind of B2B use cases like the stock music, the sync licensing, things that maybe some more background playlisting type stuff that often are just the professional studio musician or maybe the job I'm doing so that I can pursue my full artistic career. That money may be drying up because of AI.
Tell me about putting this thing together. It looks like you had a blast doing it, and I had so much fun going through these, and it just spurred so many conversations with colleagues. Talk about how you got the idea and how you pulled this thing off.
I mean, I'm always thinking through this lens, right? Because I think of our biggest problems not as something to complain about, but to say, how can we solve this? These are some of the biggest leverage opportunities that we have. And I'm always just so interested in what's going on in the minds of everybody else that's out there. I mean, if you and I talk, or so many other colleagues I talk to, a lot of it stems from this. So I'm like, I want to see, what, tens of thousands of other people out there are thinking. And I think what's so interesting about it is you get a lot of things that are conflicting, right? Too much gatekeeping was what's common, but not enough gatekeeping is the other. You start to realize how many things are just perceptions and not reality. And I think that's actually really important to kind of understand where people are coming from. It was super fun for me. It was also really interesting to see, especially for many of us in the industry, what I think people are often missing or not thinking about whatsoever. So there was very, very little mention of the fan experience at all. And while that may not feel like a problem for all of us who work in the industry, the reality is most disruptive change into music happens by what's best or new or delivers on fans' problems. And to me, it's thinking about, okay, well, we've really solved with streaming, especially a lot of fan problems and access and passive and casual listening and the right song at the right time for the right moment. But what's been clear with the super fan moment here and what everyone's talking about is we really haven't paid attention to like the big super fan, the lean in experience. And if we can think about that through the fan lens and solve that in a way that's helpful to artists and the industry, I think that's a really helpful framework and probably the biggest opportunity. But it was like literally almost never mentioned whatsoever.
What a perfect way to wrap this up. Rob, where can people find Where Music's Going and where can they learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, wheremusicsgoing.com. They can subscribe to my newsletter. And if they're on Twitter or LinkedIn, they can search for Rob Abelow and find me there.
Thanks, Rob. This has been a wonderful conversation. Let's do this again.
Thanks, Jay.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.